Hi, everybody. Welcome to Valley Before Victory. So, for our first video, we're going to be discussing the bans and where we think the meta is going to be going from there.
Yeah, definitely exciting. I think they hit a lot more cards than I was initially expecting, and
Agreed.
personally, I really like that their willingness to hit battlefields. I've been playing since release, and one of the things you realize pretty quickly while playing this game is that battlefields kind of shape, the texture of an entire game. So if there are some battlefields that come up all the time or really dictate certain play patterns, it can get kind of obnoxious after a while.
I fully agree. And, I mean, you can look at these battlefields, and they were all obviously meant to be banned for different reasons. I think
Mhm.
the most egregious one has got to be the Dreaming Tree, though, in my mind.
Yeah, yeah.
Because
I
it,
remember early days of set one, just like they were Kaisa mirrors where, when the deck was still playing Dreaming Tree, that didn't feel like real games. Like both players were on like 10 cards in hands, and then just kind of became like, okay, who drew the exact amount of removal and creatures to win the game?
yeah, and I
Um,
think the issue with it is that it makes cards that are not typically good in TCGs
mhm.
good. And normally, if you have that on like a unit, like your unit says, "Oh, you target me, draw one," for the first time you do that, that's fine because it's relegated to one unit and you have to draw that unit. But battlefields are there permanently, which means all your pump spells are good. Stupefy now can be a draw two if you just need more cards. Like it's just ridiculous at how much more power you're adding to cards that typically are not up to snuff.
Absolutely agree. I also think there's something to be said about they clearly want certain domains and pairings to have like disadvantages and advantages, and one of those disadvantages is card advantage, right? And the Dreaming Tree being a battlefield that can be played by everyone, and you're going to at least play it in one game, means that you can provide card advantage to strategies that perhaps shouldn't be have as much card advantage in them. The first example that comes to my mind is Aurelia, although they still have Stellar Corn. Just all of those pump spells, the idea of fighting an Aurelia is supposed to be like eventually they're going to run out of cards in hand. And with Dreaming Tree, that just was never true.
100%. And then looking at the Obelisk of Power, I
Mm-hmm.
don't think this card was too strong because it was a fair battlefield. You know, you and your opponent both got a benefit. I just think that it was an auto include, and that's why we needed to ban it. Because here's the thing: if you got a 3 cost legend, you put that when you're on the play, you get your legend
Mm-hmm.
down right away, no issue. 4 cost, you do it when you're on the draw, like Draven, and it just there's no reason not to play it because there's no downside to having it. Like the Dreaming Tree, your opponent could draw a card. Or there's other advantages to a lot of other battlefields where your opponent might be able to use it well. Obelisk of Power, zero downside, it just gets you into the game faster. And when you're playing a deck like Draven, Irelia, Ezreal, all these decks just want to get their thing out fast, and it kind of is oppressive to legends that are higher cost. Because
Mm-hmm.
when you do get to 5, 6, 7, it's harder to get them out, and so you're going to be playing on the back foot, and it just makes the benefit of having these lower cost legends even more so than they already are.
100% agree. Another thing about Obelisk of Power is that it's kind of sneaky, or it lies in how symmetrical it is, right? Because of how breakpoints work in this game. If you know you're going second and you make 4 runes, like for example, in the previous format, Draven being able to play Draven on the play, right? In the mirror match, if you passed, realistically, there was nothing that the fifth mana gave the other Draven player that they weren't already going to be able to do. Maybe a stack deck, right? So in that way, you've gained a huge tempo advantage just by registering a specific battlefield. Another thing I really didn't like about Obelisk of Power is I think it just really constrained deck building.
Yeah,
Realistically, like if your legend lined up with it, there was no reason not to include Obelisk of Power either going first or second to fill out your curve, which I think was boring. It was just kind of like, oh yeah, well, one of my battlefields is already decided for me, which I don't think is something that you realistically want in this sort of game. And the
100%.
last reason I think is that is this is a sneaky Aurelia nerf. They didn't hit Aurelia directly with any of these bans, but I do think they recognize that perhaps they need to rein that power level in if they're going to hit everything else around it.
And the battlefields are a
And
great way to do it.
exactly. So hitting Obelisk of Power also allows you to say, hey, those Aurelia games where they're almost always, starting with like sneaky deckhand or whatever, those aren't going to happen anymore. That's no longer a strategy they can consistently rely on, which I do think reigns in the deck.
Yeah.
And you could say something similar about Aurora, right? Now they can never guarantee a turn one, a Catalyst of Eons.
Yep, 100%. And then for the last one, Reaper's Row, I mean, this one was kind of egregious. We saw it in set one with
Yeah,
Kaisa, where you just play your small unit, it can't die, and then you use your spells to kill the other units. So you slowly get your points up because you're doing the damage. And we saw it on set two with Draven, where it's not about killing the units, but it's the fact that, oh, you pulled out, I won combat. And unless you're another Draven, you don't care about pulling your units out because your opponents aren't going to be drawing cards. It's
absolutely.
way too strong in those decks.
But to be honest, even without the existence of Draven, I would have wanted them to hit Reaper's Row eventually. I think Draven just kind of is the needle that broke the camel's back. Um, I think Reaver's Row is kind of an aberration. It's just not how Riftbound is supposed to be played, right? The
Yeah.
rules of engagement are you send in a unit, and the mere act of doing that, you are putting that unit at risk. And I think that is, I at least speaking for me, that is part of the what I like about this game and how it makes combat more dynamic than in other card games. And Reaver's Row just completely subtracted that from the equation. You could just send in anything, you would always get it back. The double Reaver's Row games, like
Nothing happened
I'm
in those
sure you
games.
remember from back in the day, those were not fun games. Those were obnoxious as hell. Uh, so I'm glad, Rip Bozo, good riddance.
Yep. So going to the cards that were banned, called shot. I think everyone called that. I don't think we
Yeah,
really need to delve much into it. Drawing two for zero is just too good.
it's
Like
good. It's really good.
you put that in any deck with Ezreal, you get one seal. Like even if you're paying the seal cost, like let's
Mhm.
say you're playing it fairly, it's just too good because you're
Yeah,
gonna
like
use it on your break.
Aurora
Yeah.
was playing this just to recycle, just on their like third turn when they had 9 mana. They're like, okay, I look 4 deep for an Aurora. If I find it, I win the game, and if I don't, I lose the game. You know, like
Yeah.
that's not fun or interesting.
Way too good. Now
And also
Draven.
to say nothing of the logistic problems, right?
Oh yeah.
I I can speak from experience that especially in paper, people take forever to resolve this card. So
Yeah. Now, Draven was an interesting hit. I did not expect them to hit a champion unit. Now, we did have another Red Draven, so Red Draven is not fully dead. You can still have the worse one, but this was a big hit.
you can also play the purple one, which I think
Yeah.
is probably what people will do. Um, I actually I'm a little less surprised by this than you are. I think it's just because you can't really hit a legend in this game.
Yeah.
There may come a time where we do, and maybe Draven will eventually have to be hit. Who knows? But just from an optics standpoint and a deck building investment standpoint, right? You're invalidating spinning axes. You're invalidating, um, you know, uh, a lot of people's like existing lists. You can't ban a legend outright, I don't think. So I
No.
think banning Draven Vanquisher was a really good compromise. A lot of the power of this deck was that they had a guaranteed turn two banger of a play, and all they had to figure out was what are they going to play turn one and turn three. Now that they don't have that, I think the deck loses a lot of its bite, and also like for what it's worth, like I think this legend or sorry this unit was also just generically good. And would not have surprised me if at some point it became more widely adopted overall. So I think getting rid of this is perfectly reasonable.
No, I definitely think it's reasonable. What surprised me, though, is it sets a statement, though, that
Yeah,
they're not
no, for
afraid
sure.
to ban champion units in the future,
Yeah,
which
and
is
I think
a
that's
good
a good
thing.
statement to send. Yeah,
Um, then we have fight or flight. Honestly, I think the only reason this is banned is because it doesn't have a purple power cost. It needed a purple power cost. The card is super broken. Like, don't get me
yes.
wrong. It's aggressive, it's defensive, it does everything you want in a can. But I think if it had one purple power cost, it might have been saved.
I heard someone describe this as basically cryptic command in our game, and it's because it's true. If you're not familiar with Magic, it's basically cryptic command was just a powerful interaction spell that could represent many different types of interaction. And Fight or Flight did the same thing, right? You could use it offensively to push a unit off a base, and of course with Draven that says draw a card on it. You could use it defensively to save your units. You could
It
hide
also
it,
says
and
draw a
now your
card.
hold is so much more powerful. Correct. You know, there were so many different ways to abuse it. Any in set one, right? Being able to always untap 2 mana and have fight or flight up at all times without having to sacrifice any power. No, I think, and also we're almost forgetting the other application of fight or flight. You can use it to gank, right? You send a
Yep.
unit that was holding on a battlefield while it's ready. Now you can send it to the other battlefield, score on there as well. No, this card did too much for its cost. I agree. If it cost the power, probably would have been fine. And it wouldn't surprise me if they try to release a fixed fight or flight. You could argue Flash is already kind of the fixed fight or flight. Um, but
Yep.
this card as it exists, I think, was far too powerful for the game, and I'm glad they recognized that early.
Oh, I fully agree. The card was broken. It needed a power cost, maybe even two. And I think the crazy thing is when you make this reaction speed by hiding it, rebuke doesn't work. Your
Right.
battlefield damage doesn't work. Like this is crazy that you're able to just be like, "Oh, you have rebuke?" Nope. And it's not like
Yeah.
Flash that has a downside. There's benefits to it. So, really
Yeah. No, it's
happy this is gone.
just yeah, super super agree.
And then Scrap Heap. Look, me and Omar have talked about this a lot. I think they didn't need to ban Scrap Heap yet, but likely down the line they would have had to, because it's going to eventually hit a breaking point. And so it's better to ban it early than to ban it late, and I'm happy they banned it. But I think had they left it, the game would have been mostly fine.
I agree, but I also kind of like banning Scrappy from a philosophical standpoint. The more I think about it, so what we saw in set two, right, was a style of deck Miracle that cycled through its entire deck and did a whole bunch of like wombo combo stuff and saw like it would stack its deck and do it again. Um, and we faced like I would argue like this ban list was kind of like a crossroads. Is Riftbound going to be about that type of gameplay? Which it could be, right? There is an appeal to that, and it wouldn't surprise me if that becomes like the core of like the Eternal format that they eventually announce. Or are we going to be a game about combat and units? Um, what I like about the Scrap Heap ban is it says no, we are going to be a game about combat and units. We're not. We're disincentivizing you to draw your whole deck between the Call Shot ban, the Scrap Heap ban, and I would even argue the Dreaming Tree ban, um, and making it so that no, you actually the game is about combat units taking over battlefields. It's not about hey, who can draw through their entire pile and then deterministically stack everything
Yeah.
after that.
And you can see that philosophy in set 3 a lot, where the spells are definitely less powerful than in set 2, but the units are coming in at reaction speed. They're able to
Mm-hmm.
basically almost be a spell because you're just putting them on the battlefield right away during the combat as like a pump of sorts.
Yeah, it's exciting stuff. I think that there is a lot of merit to be gained and a lot of power to be mined from making creatures closer to spells. Especially since we've seen, especially since they are the way that we score points in this game. Yes, there are some like outside ways to score points, but for the most part, the way you score a point is by walking into a battlefield and conquering. So in a game that's so unit focused, I like making the units more powerful.
I agree. So we made a quick tier list of where we think the meta is going to lie with these bans. And obviously there were some rules changes. So you're going to see Jax down in C tier.
Yeah.
Jax, you may think it got nothing hit, but the thing is they've changed a lot of the rules in Jax, so you can't dequip
Mm-hmm.
and re-equip to the same unit. So that's a pretty big hit to him, as well as stuff like with the Warmogs, you have to
Yes.
pay costs before it goes on the stack, and since you can't
Correct.
pay the cost of getting the buff the first time around, it's
Yeah.
gonna not work the way that it used to. So that's a pretty big hit to
So
Jax.
to be clear, that's only if a unit is going in not already buffed. If a unit is buffed, you can still stack the triggers the way you want it to. The main difference is that the ruling is to put a trigger on the stack, you must now pay any costs associated with that effect. That was not the ruling before. You could just put the trigger on the sorry, not on the stack, on the chain, and then decide later if you were going to pay those costs. I like this change. I think that it's more intuitive. Um, while there was some outplay potential before, I think this just kind of cleans up the rules and
Less
looks
feels
for
bad.
less weird corner cases. Yeah, exactly.
Um, so looking at the new A tier, the new top list,
Mm-hmm.
Aurelia did get some hits in the battlefield department, but in the card department, she's doing just fine. And I think that we're going to be seeing a lot more Aurelia with slightly tweaked builds to adjust to the card draw being a bit worse for one of those three games, as well as the ramp
Yeah.
being a bit worse.
I will say that, I do think that Fight or Flight was also like a significant hit. I know people are already saying, buy your flashes or whatever. And yeah, that is a valuable alternative, but there were times where people would use Fight or Flight, more defensively to push a unit off. They were just trying to get the last point, for example. Like that's no longer possible, just
Yeah.
Flash. That said, I think she's still the clear day one winner. Whether or not that pans out, we'll see. I think the more obvious winner, though, is going to be Victor. Victor
Oh
just
yeah.
seems super strong coming out of these changes. Doesn't have to worry about Draven anymore. Can
Doesn't have
now
to worry about
build
Asriel.
towards correct. Yeah. it really can just focus in on, hey, I'm going to run a bunch of good yellow interactions to deal with the Aurelias. I'm going to play enough pressure to overwhelm the Auroras. Um, the only matchup that I think is bad for it in A tier is probably Kaisa, and even then, I still think it's probably a 55-45 at worst.
Well, Aurelia does have a lot of counters, so we can't discount that Aurelia might have a good matchup if they draw the right cards.
Not untrue, but I also think that like there are some spells that Aurelia can't counter realistically, like Imperial Decree, right? Is kind of
100%.
really powerful into Aurelia specifically, and that's a spell that Victor already wants to play.
And so you're going to have to be playing
Um,
extra careful into Victor, where you're
yep,
going to want your flashes to get off the battlefield during Imperial Decree, or just to
yep,
always be able to ready and hop out, kind of like what Lucian does.
correct. Other decks that we think are going to do well. I mean, Kaisa's also just solid deck. Having a seal in your Legend Zone, pretty strong.
Yeah, and nothing got
I
touched
think
by it.
especially yeah, well, you could argue that the Reaver's row hit was something. Obelisk, I think everyone lost Obelisk, so I think that's roughly an
Roughly
even hit
even for
across the board.
everyone. Yeah.
Yeah. But I do like Kaisa's position. I especially since the other control deck in the previous format, Ezreal, just lost Called Shot, so it doesn't have the same like crazy card advantage engine that it used to. So Kaisa can kind of keep up now.
Yeah, and talking about Ezreal, like prior to the bans, Ezreal was just Victor, but I have better card draw and
Mm-hmm,
filtering. So Ezreal just would get to those cards they needed faster, and you never ran into that case of like, oh, I drew 3 Imperial Decrees, I can't do anything.
mm-hmm.
Um, but now, where Ezreal is going to end up, like I think it's definitely still viable, but it's going to be a lot of changes, and maybe it'll even go back to like the Rat Pack Ezreal that we saw early on in Set 2.
It's very possible. That said, I think the necessity for Rat in particular is gone if Draven is not really as much part of the metagame. But who knows? Like maybe Draven does end up still being a playable deck, and the Rat is how Ezreal can keep up.
I mean, it's a very good way to fight against Victor, because if you can zip in and out, then all of a sudden
Mm,
you don't have to worry about a lot of the Victor's damage. Especially if you can get your rat to 7, you don't care about Stupefy or Singularity anymore. So I could see
that's very
rat coming up.
reasonable. Yeah, I can see it too. It's another way to solve the like power problems that sometimes Ezreal can have. Not always, but on occasion you would just kind of run really low on runes way too early.
Yeah. The next one we have MF in this top tier. MF is just what we've seen lately to be the best Aurora player. Now they did lose some purple cards, so maybe it won't be MF, maybe it'll be Master E. That would be the best Aurora player. It's yet to be seen, but that's mostly why we have her here. Maybe Sivir will be better. But there might be a better Aurora player, but we're thinking that one Aurora deck will be at the top, and we're putting MF there for now.
Yeah, it's hard not to give the nod to Aurora here since they've lost almost basically nothing except for you can make an argument for Obelisk, but again,
Everyone.
across the board hit. Um, so I will say Cult Shot is definitely definitely a little bit of a hit, but that said, there's still a lot going for this deck, and the fact that Miracle is no longer around to just completely punish it into the ground, um, I think Aurora is due for a comeback, and it's got a lot of interesting cards coming up in set three.
Yeah. And our final pick is Rek'Sai. So this is a bit of speculation, but Rek'Sai has always been super good at being very aggressive, and it would get punished by Draven very hardly. It get punished by Aurelia sometimes, and it get punished by Ezreal that could just keep up with the card draw and still remove all your units. But now that Ezreal's taken a hit, Draven's taken a hit, two of its biggest like threats are down. So maybe Rek'Sai has just enough aggressiveness and just enough speed to propel it to the top of the meta.
I would add into that pile card advantage.
Yeah,
On a list where we've hit a bunch of sources of card advantage, having a way to get card advantage in your legend zone is just so powerful. I've seen the decks or the games that Rek'Sai wins are the ones where it gets off the ground early enough that they're playing a card every single turn. And Draven obviously could keep up with that for reasons, but and Ezreal could keep up as well. But now they can't really as much anymore. So it'll be interesting to see how well Rek'Sai does. It's entirely possible we're overrating it, but I have hope.
yeah. And then at the top of B tier with Lucian. Lucian's done very well. The main issue with Lucian is just finding the cards at the right time, and nothing's really changed about that. So I think it's going to continue to perform as a solid tier 2 deck that can win events and is going to do very well. Ari has been fine, also performing decently well. I don't know if that's because a lot of people like playing Ari because they like
Mm.
Ari, or if it's because Ari's good, but Thwonk and cards like that have definitely helped that deck.
It seems in general too that they want holding to be a better strategy in Riftbound. Like we're getting a lot of good holding tools in set three, and a lot of the things they hit yesterday were things are really good at conquering. So Ari's a pretty good deck at holding. Blue and green are pretty good colors for holding. I could definitely see it getting better and better with time.
But yeah, so I think that's all for us today, unless you have any last comments, Omar?
No, I'm just glad that I just want to shout out Riot. I think their communication has been really good. I like the transparency. I like the fact that they're willing to be bold with their first ban list despite the criticism, and just keep it up. I think if they take this much attention to the rest of the year, where Riftbound will be in a great place.
I fully agree. So thank you so much for watching us, and if you like this content, please keep an eye out for our new videos that will be coming out soon, as well as our streams every Tuesday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern on Twitch.
Thanks, everyone.